Welcome to the Irish Huddle Podcast, blueandgold.com's Notre Dame football team-centric podcast. I'm Patrick Engel, joined by our senior editor, Lou Samoji. It's Thursday, September 10th, 2020, and Notre Dame is going to play football in, about 45 hours as we're recording this. Lou, are you ready?
Yes, I am. It's funny, right around this time a month ago, the Big Ten said it's canceling football, and right there you thought there was going to be a domino effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's still kind of seems, it's hit me in a sense. Okay, we're going to play, and this game is less than 2 days away, but it's still not fully there just because we haven't seen anything, right? The whole thing still seems like it's alienated. The only thing we've seen is a few practice highlights, and everybody's been over Zoom, and of course you can Zoom with anybody in the world, almost kind of like they're just in this portal somewhere, right? And like we just haven't seen them in person, but it's real, right? We have depth charts, we have TV times.
Yeah.
They have the ACC logo on the field and on the jersey, so it's at least it's starting to finally register for me.
As a kid, I grew up a mile from the campus. And for me, the signal always was right around in August. You could hear the band practicing. You started to feel that buzz, that energy on the campus and everywhere. And, that's not going to be happening this year. There's not going to be a band on the field. You don't hear the practices necessarily. And it's going to be odd to see the cap at 15,525 in Notre Dame Stadium. That's going to be the lowest since the 1930s during the height of the Great Depression. So it's going to be unusual, but I think once you start actually playing, it's like I was watching the U.S. Open tennis the other day, and it's still great tennis. There's nobody cheering or clapping, and the seats are empty, but it's still good competition, and I think eventually we'll warm up to it.
And for any of you guys listening out there who are kind of in the same thing of, okay, this hasn't really registered, it's not there. I promise you that when there's a play call you don't like, or a big play that goes for or against Notre Dame, you will react as a fan in a manner as if it were any other year, especially because there's still a lot to figure out here. But we do have a depth chart, and that's what we kind of want to get into today. But first, the best way to support this podcast is to subscribe to blueandgold.com. You can get a 60-day free trial with the promo code Irish60. That's Irish60. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at Patrick Engel _ENGEL. And you can follow Lou at BGI_Lou Samoji, SOMOGYI. If you'd be so kind, please leave us a rating and review in Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And it's been a little while since we last recorded, but we will be with you twice per week during the season. And you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Before we get into it, this podcast is brought to you by JFQ Lending. With interest rates below 3%, there has never been a better time to lock in a low fixed interest rate on your mortgage. You'll never need to think about refinancing again. Set it and forget it. And with JFQ Lending, you are guaranteed to get the highest level of customer service. They have A+ rating with Better Business Bureau and over 3,000 5-star reviews. Give Jared Ritter a call today at 480-637-7979 or email Jared directly at jritter, RITTER, at jfqlending.com. JFQ Lending, equal access lender, licensed in over 40 states. www.jfqlending.com. So we have a depth chart. It was released on Monday, Labor Day. Now, ordinarily, we would think, okay, whatever. It's the depth chart. It's nothing that we hadn't seen because we'd be at practice, or nothing that was really that, surprising from a, wider spectrum here. I don't want to say any of all of these are, massively surprising right now. Things were kind of trending the way that a lot of this ended up going, but certainly means more because we've seen nothing. The only thing we've really been able to do is take Brian Kelly at his word about what's going to happen, who has stood out, and what some positions might look like. So we'll learn a lot more from the opener Saturday than we usually would. And this depth chart is kind of ripe for dissection more than it ordinarily would be. So we know about the running backs. Of course, the top two were listed as Kyron Williams, the sophomore, and then a bunch of oars beyond it, but the first name there being Chris Tyree, the top 100 freshman. Unsolved going into camp, but not really a surprise or, kind of news that was hidden in a sense, because Kelly had talked about both of them all camp. Receivers. This is where it gets a little interesting and some things that maybe we didn't expect to see, a week ago or things. Javon McKinley listed at the field receiver over Braden Lenzy, who was listed behind him. Bennett Skoranek officially is Kevin Austin's fill-in at the W boundary receiver. And slot receiver Avery Davis listed as the starter over Lawrence Keys. Lou, what were your initial impressions of seeing those kind of interesting tweaks that we, again, didn't really think about, or at least not publicly, or weren't discussed before they were put on that depth chart?
Yeah, I thought back to last August, and I'm saying, okay, fast forward to September of 2020, and your starting receivers are Avery Davis, Bennett Skoranek, Javon McKinley, who was suspended for part of that spring, and you weren't even sure he was going to be back. But that is one of the positions. Running back is another. Sometimes, rotations at linebacker and corner, where sometimes I think too much is put on who is starting. Iowa State game, the Camping World Bowl, Brock Wright started in a 3 tight end set. He's a starter. Well, he had 8 snaps, and non-starter Braden Lenzy had 33 snaps. Now, who's the starter and who's not? That's going to be dependent so much on situations, packages, who blocks well in certain play calls, who is best with the route running and some others. We talk about all the time getting people into the game, mixing it up, playing for the long run through November. Well, you usually aren't going to get that with guys getting 60, 70 snaps. So you've seen that with the defensive line the last few years with Mike Elston, where there's that rotation. And obviously, offensive line, you're not going to have those type of rotations. That's different with rhythm and continuity. But receiver, tight end, running back, those are areas where you're going to have people, shuffling in and out. They'll be bringing in plays. They'll be getting into different alignments. So I think we sometimes get a little too hung up there about who's starting and who's not.
And I think especially it's important to note with anything that we would have seen in this camp in particular, we know Notre Dame has had players test positive for the virus. We don't know who, we don't know how long, and of course players get contact traced and quarantined for the same reasons. Don't really know publicly. Couldn't say if we knew every single one and every single contact tracing guy who they were, and Notre Dame of course is not going to. So if you have, Notre Dame has had 23 practices, I believe. Today, Thursday, is the 23rd. Let's say you've played 10 of those because someone had the virus or was contact traced, and somebody else didn't and played them all. That might kind of be something you think about if you're saying, at least for the opening game, of okay, who are we going to list as a starter, or who we might need to play more snaps because this other guy we were counting on is getting caught up a little bit because he missed a week of practice or 2 weeks of practice.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be the virus, Patrick. I mean, who's to say that somebody didn't get a concussion or get hurt and had to sit out a few practices? Kevin Austin got hurt in a regular workout and had to have surgery that's going to put him out 8 to 12 weeks. Same with the sophomore defensive end, Nana Osef-Amensa. You can get injured sometimes in just regular drills or walking across the field, trip or something like that. So it's not just the virus. I think that's the first thing in everybody's mind, but it could be a number of injuries, which through the years we see happen all the time in training camp, and it's going to sideline you a week, maybe a few days, but whatever, those reps might put you a little bit behind because it is very competitive at a lot of positions. And that's what you want to see if you are going to be a competitive football team where there is not that significant drop-off.
Right. This is football. They're playing football. They're hitting each other. There are going to be guys that get hurt, even if it's a thing that's not a tear, doesn't cause them to miss a game, but they're out for a week of practice. Of course, the virus is adding on to that, and I believe 10 of the 12 positive cases they announced came since August 1st. So certainly adding more absence possibilities. But right, I mean, this is training camp. There are injuries, big and small that happen. And anyway, back to the receivers, and exactly to your point. I mean, the starters there listed at the slot and the field spot caught combined or 21 passes for Notre Dame last year. And really the three starting receivers caught 21 passes for Notre Dame last year because Bennett Skronik wasn't on the team. And just kind of further illustrating, okay, like it's the room as a whole is either green or been on the team but hasn't gotten the big game reps or played 60 snaps a game at any point. And no matter really how you look at it or how they could have put the names on the depth chart or whoever they would have put at any of these positions, I think it kind of comes down to, can Ian Book make these guys better? Can he elevate their play? I mean, you're looking at, okay, the leading returning receiver out of this group had 13 catches. And of course, Bennett Skronik having 110, but again, didn't play on the team. And on the other hand, you have a quarterback who's a 3-year starter. This isn't like, Book is walking into a Alabama type situation where, you could throw me at quarterback with their receivers and, I'd actually complete a pass, where if you put me anywhere else, I wouldn't. But, and of course, you get the idea here. It's the dynamic is clearly, all right, it's not new quarterback or quarterback who struggled walking into loaded skill position room. This is talented but still unproven guys who've done it in bit roles coming into it. And I think that's kind of the general question of really all year is, can Ian Book make these guys better, make this an explosive unit? And you look at, okay, some of these teams that have won the college football playoff and put up these crazy offensive numbers, they've got skilled receivers, but it still has to happen here with the quarterback actually making them and getting them there. So that's kind of my thing all year long. Can Book get this group acclimated and acclimated fast?
Yeah. Well, when you lose the get out of jail card that he had with Chase Claypool last year, and he said it many times himself, Ian Book, those weren't 50-50 balls that he was throwing up to Chase Claypool. Those were usually 90-10 balls because here's somebody with like a 42-inch vertical at 6'4". If it was up there, he was going to get it. Now, did he over-rely on that at times? We'll find out because this year it's Ian Book's turn to be the get-out-of-jail card for the receivers if they don't necessarily do something correctly. He had another very reliable target in Chris Fink. Caught over 100 balls the past couple of years. And then, there was a second-round tight end as well coming across the middle who was extremely reliable safety valve. So these roles change as each year goes. One year it's going to be the receivers who help carry the quarterback. The next year it's going to be the quarterback who has to carry the receivers, just like sometimes the line is going to be rebuilt. And so you have to lean more on the skill position players. That's part of college football. You're going to always have a lineup in flux, and one year that are concerns, next year are going to be strengths. Last year at this time we were talking, gosh, that linebacker position, it's just we don't know. Without Drew Tranquil and Tevon Coney, and started off slow, and then he developed into a potential All-American now with Jeremiah Owusu and Drew White, first-time starter who had a really strong year, and you're developing younger guys, and all of a sudden now it's a strength, and that's always kind of the trade-off in college football.
And in kind of that cyclical thing, I mean, this is just a cyclical sport, right? Like you said, I'll kind of take it a step further. Ian Book is the offenses as a whole is, get out of jail card or bailout card, or okay, we need a play here. Who's your catalyst, or who's making this happen? It's Book, right? Or at least it is until somebody is a Claypool type figure, or at least anywhere in the realm of a Claypool type figure. And I don't know that that's going to make every Notre Dame fan feel like, oh, but this is great. I mean, we still have to see something from Book, right? It's certainly encouraging from how it went post Virginia Tech, really. But I mean, are we? I don't think it's anything safe to just say, all right, they have a new offensive coordinator and a QB who worked through some things, even though we ended on a good note, to just say like, yeah, this is going to be automatic, Claypool type consistently of big plays, or quarterback equivalent of Claypool type plays all year. So that's what I'll be, at least in part, watching for on Saturday against a good Duke defense. Probably not the best one they're going to see all year, but they're not going to be just rolling over, Western Michigan or some low Power 5 team or anything like, or low Group of 5 team, sorry, or anything like that.
Yeah, maybe one of the 2 or 3 best, though, on the edges of the defense with what they have there. I mean, they have NFL caliber players, both in the defensive backfield as well as at the end positions specifically. And that's going to be one of the great matchups too, is you're going to have Victor Demunkiche and also Chris Rumpf going against 2 other future pros here next year, Liam Eichenberg and Robert Hainsey at the tackle position. So it's strength on strength there. Here's Notre Dame that graded out with the second best pass blocking unit per Pro Football Focus last year and returns its entire line against a Duke defense that's been noted for its pass rush. And also Rumpf, I believe, graded out as one of the best pass percentage rushers in the country. So it's strength on strength there, and that's going to be one of the intriguing matchups.
We just talked about Duke's defense here. I think most of the depth chart curiosities, we'll call them, were on the defensive side for Notre Dame. And we were talking about linebackers, the Buck linebacker being the first one of those where not really sure who was going to get it going into the year because we didn't have spring practice. Brian Kelly, when we asked him about it in August, he just said there's competition and then named literally, 8 guys who had probably gotten a single rep at Buck. It's the minimum qualifier for him to mention there. But now we know it is Shane Simon, the junior, former top 200 recruit, and Maris Lufau, the sophomore, who took a red shirt last year, as co-starters. And what was just as interesting was who wasn't on there. No Jack Lamb, who was the linebacker in nickel packages, dime packages last year. Brian Kelly told us earlier today that he had a bit of a setback from the hip injury that he suffered last season that ended his season, had that setback in training camp, still kind of working back from that, and that he's really not up to speed of where they might have thought. So probably would only see him on special teams early on, if we see him at all. Someone to watch maybe later on if he gets healthy for trying to push past somebody for a sub-package role. So we don't know who's going to be the starter at Buck. Again, it's an or between Simon and Lufau. And even in these past linebacker vacancies, at least since Clark Lee or Mike Elko has been here, any one of these positions, it seems like for the large majority, if not all of them, if I'm forgetting somebody, say from 2017, they filled the job, and that guy was the guy for the entire season. Like we think of the Buck last year, it was Asmar Bilal, and Asmar Bilal's job. There was no, rotating in and out there guy at Buck in the base defense, or if you stuck with the base defense, say in passing downs. And last year at middle linebacker, if it was base defense, Drew White was going to be in there. And yeah, they took him out on some third downs and some sub packages. And the same thing goes with Usu Koromoa. But if you're in your base defense, those were the guys. There was no rotation. And
even more so the year before that, Patrick, with Drew Tranquil and Tavon Coney. I think at the end of the year when we added it up, it's like they took about 92% of the snaps, and that's blowouts everything. So it was an immense volume.
So early on, if you just kind of had to just take it right now, we haven't seen these guys, but is this going to figure itself out and be even, let's call it an Asmar Bilal type situation where, all right, he's the guy. I'm actually pretty sure he played the most snaps among linebackers last year. Or is this going to be some kind of timeshare where, okay, no, it's not just guy comes out in a sub package. You might see a base defense, Simon in there one series, Lufau next. What do you think?
Depends on how they perform, really, in the course of the game. Once the lights come on, it's somebody gets into a rhythm and just really starts playing assignments on football, starts making plays. I don't think you're going to see people being taken out for the sake of, okay, let's see what this guy can do. If somebody is playing very well and against the type of alignment that they want, I think you keep them in there. Now, there is a reason why they listed an or with Marist over at the Buck position. He's somebody that I've heard many times has just really come on so well. And look, last year, I hadn't seen this before, but with the NCAA rule, which allows you not to play 4 games at any time, they specifically reserved him for the biggest games on special teams. Georgia, USC, Michigan, I believe, Stanford. They didn't play him in blowouts against New Mexico and Bowling Green because it's like, we don't really need him there. We want to utilize him just like they did Isaiah Foskey for that final game against Stanford. It's like, hey, we might need him in that game. And boy, did they when he blocked the punt that turned the game around. So I anticipate that there will be a little bit more of a rotation. There was, I think, even when Mike Elko was the coordinator, Greer Martini was the guy who was rotating in there in a 3-man rotation with Niles Morgan and Tavon Coney. So that was like a 3-for-2 deal, and maybe you might have something like that here too. I don't know. Bo Bauer at the Mike position behind Drew White. He's had a very good season. Now, in the past, Clark Lee has said he'd like to ideally see like that hockey line switch at linebacker as well, where it's 2 and 2. It's like, okay, here comes the second unit in, and they're going to handle this shift. And then in the next shift, we bring in the first group for, the next 2 series or so. But if there's a year to do it, it might be now.
I'm going to go out on the limb a little bit. And again, this isn't based on me seeing these guys in person because we haven't been able to. By the 3rd game, one of those Buck linebackers will play 60-plus snaps. And that's how it's going to go.
That happened last year kind of with Asmar Bilal. He did not start off well against Louisville and New Mexico. And it's like, get him out. They stayed with him, and he became that 50, 60 snap guy, one of the most consistent people out there. We were, I think, kind of expecting a rotation last year too. And the only one that was really in there, as you mentioned, was Jack Lamb in the sub packages.
And I guess to kind of go off of what you said, if there's a year to rotate them, this is it. And you might think, all right, if, like we thought last year, it's Asmar Bilal. He wasn't great at the Rover in 2018. It might even be fair to say that he was their worst defensive starter that year. And I think he said this later in the season. Yeah, it took him a couple of games, but once he got it, it was pretty clear this guy just plays winning football, and we're going to keep him in there. And if they gave that benefit of the doubt.
That's the phrase right there. Winning football.
Right.
Is what they're looking at.
And if they gave him the benefit of the doubt, I don't see why they wouldn't give it to, say, Marist, who they raved about and, like you said, saved for the biggest assignments, albeit on special teams, or I guess even Simon, who he's got the physical tools, right, and it was a highly regarded recruit and everything.
A top 100 recruit, just like James Lamb. 2 years ago, everyone was saying, "Hey, we really want to see these freshmen, come into the forefront there." Well, here's the opportunity now. They're upperclassmen, they're junior, and it's time for them to seize that moment.
And again, I would think the exact same thing. Let's say whoever starts, struggles, and the other one kind of plays, and then let's say it's the same starting lineup the next week against South Florida, and somebody really clicks. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see, say, by Wake Forest, one of that guy who took a minute to get it and then got it, just rolls out there for 60 snaps a game. Both of these guys have pedigrees, say, that you would want to give time and the benefit of the doubt to. So we'll see. I mean, we have barely seen Marist at all because he's been in the program for a year, and Shane, of course, in kind of bits and pieces in games the last couple of years.
Actually, back in the spring, it really looked like, it sounded like, from what Brian Kelly indicated, was that both Lamb and Simon were out. But Lamb was supposed to be back in by at least the end of March and before everything was canceled. That was the prognosis. Whereas Simon, with that patella, which can be a really serious injury, they were hoping he could be back in August. And I was even wondering for a while there, do you take a medical redshirt here? But
it would have made sense.
It's kind of been the opposite, really. It's Simon who's been now the one ready to go, whereas Lamb, according to Kelly, it was a career-threatening injury for him with that hip tear. So a little bit of a role reversal there.
One of those situations with Lamb where you're kind of thankful for him that this season, if it's injury hampered and he tries to give it a go and just isn't going to cost him any eligibility with the new ruling, especially because he's already taken that the redshirt year, his first year on campus. So at least if it doesn't end up working out and he barely plays and tries a couple of games or plays and just can't do it, he's got that in his back pocket if nothing else. Then it's interesting with the spring practice, and just kind of illustrate how much things can change. The one we saw, it was Jordan Genmark-Heath working with the first team, Lamb and Simon out, but kind of thinking, okay, they're going to come back at some point in the spring, even if it's just for a practice and the blue gold game, and they're going to challenge. One of them's gone. One of them's injured, and we'll see what he does on defense. And, of course, one of them is a co-starter, but not there really, or not officially there. And one guy we didn't even think about, who, if I'm not mistaken, was training at Rover at times last year, is someone who could easily has the chance to win the job and play a 60-snap role. And illustrating further on, what other changes like that could we see that we've heard nothing about or has been not at all discussed by Kelly. So again, just another example of how interesting and all the subplots that watching in this season opener is going to reveal that we just haven't really been able to sniff out, because you don't see these things happening over the course of a month of training camp.
Yep.
And coming in, of course, we had the one Buck linebacker spot. Defensive backs kind of all over the place outside of Kyle Hamilton. We're going to touch on the corner and safety depth chart reveal, I guess. But first, let me tell you about yesterday's restaurant in Granger. It is a full-service restaurant serving some of the best food you will ever taste. At yesterday's restaurant, the philosophy is simple. Life is short, eat well. They believe that every meal should be a special occasion. That's why at yesterday's, they serve only the finest organic and locally grown and produced vegetables, fruits, dairy, meats, and fish. They hand make most of their delicious meals from scratch, using only the finest ingredients available. Everything they serve is fresh and guaranteed delicious, and the recipes are unique and original. From prime rib, fresh fish, to the awarding Great Scott Burger, Rated by ZZ Zippy as the #1 hamburger in a 100-mile radius, you are sure to delight your taste buds. Yesterday's makes their desserts from scratch, fresh every day, including the world-famous Corbett cheesecake. Let the staff who love what they do make your Yesterday's restaurant experience outstanding. Visit us online at yesterdays-granger.com or book your reservation on OpenTable or call 574-272-7017. Notre Dame released its cornerback depth chart with a true freshman inclusion here. Clarence Lewis, his freshman classmate, listed as a co-starter with Tariq Bracy at the field corner. And kind of when you're thinking, all right, well, Bracy's one of the only real returning guys who played a role last year. Wouldn't be that hard to just pencil him in. But here comes Clarence Lewis, true freshman, pushing him for the job where, at least as the depth chart would imply, you could very easily walk out there with the defense's first snap on Saturday. Nick McLeod, the other corner at boundary, the grad transfer from NC State, certainly not surprising considering what they didn't have at boundary, which was experience. He brings that, but still, McLeod is officially the other starting corner. But let's talk about that field corner one with Bracy and Clarence Lewis, particularly what Brian Kelly said earlier this week about who Clarence Lewis reminds him of. And I thought it was kind of a bizarre thing where he says we can be too eager to run with comps and then makes at least an eyebrow raising comp. And I don't think he was trying to say that, the draft stock and career arc is going to be the same for Clarence Lewis as it is for Kavari Russell, who Lewis drew the comparison to. But here's what Kelly said. Clarence has clearly demonstrated as a true freshman that we can put him in on the field at the same level or possibly even higher level than the level Kavari had to play as a true freshman. And we did pretty good that year. Of course, that was 2012. You all know what happened there. Russell ended up being a third-round pick, I believe, in the NFL draft. And I don't think, again, Kelly was trying to say that, okay, Lewis has the athletic traits and things like that. But clearly the level of trust that they had in Kavari and that they have in Clarence Lewis is there and is probably the most interesting or unforeseen thing we would have seen in this camp, if you ask me.
Yeah, it was the biggest surprise to me when I picked up the depth chart and just was perusing it. And there's a couple of layers to it. One was, first, Tariq Bracy last year played the fourth most snaps in the defensive backfield behind the three guys who have graduated, Alohi Gilman, Jalen Elliott, and Troy Pride Jr. He had something like 470 snaps. So here was a very experienced guy, an effective guy. He led the team in pass breakups with 7. He was out there on many, many big occasion, meaningful situations, just as he was as a freshman when he was kind of like the Clarence Lewis surprise coming out of a small area in California and played quite a bit his freshman season. So you're just thinking, okay, he's got that area locked down. And you see Clarence Lewis, number 2, and that in itself is kind of a wow. Among the 4 cornerbacks that they recruited, now one, Landon Bartleson, he never made it here because of off-the-field reasons. But Caleb Alford and Ramon Henderson both were early entrants in January. They at least also went through a winter conditioning program. It didn't help them in the spring because spring ball was canceled, but they at least had that advantage of having that conditioning program and strength program for several months. And out of nowhere, Clarence Lewis comes here, and it's not just coming in to be the backup. He's listed as as basically the co-starter at the position. With Kavari Russell in 2012, he came in as a running back, actually. He was recruited as a running back / slot player. And Notre Dame had graduated its 2 starters from the previous year, Robert Blanton and Gary Gray. And then its top corner returning, who was a nickel previously, Lowell Wood, He tore an Achilles, I think, in the preseason, and it's like he's out, and all of a sudden, Kavari Russell, they're moving him to corner out of, I don't want to say desperation, but the bodies are extremely thin there. And even Kavari admitted, I'm not sure I'm up to this. He became a starter the entire season, a freshman All-America on what was the top-ranked defense throughout the year. And, the coordinator, Bob Diaco, kind of built a defense which protected the cornerbacks some where they weren't put in difficult situations. But Kavari more than held his own. And when you start throwing that name around with Clarence Lewis, that's something notable.
If you would have told me in, say, July that there was going to be one of the three freshman corners to get on the two deep, I wouldn't have really been surprised considering the lack of proven or experienced guys behind McLeod and Bracey, but certainly wouldn't have pictured as a co-starter and would not have imagined Clarence Lewis. But I think the opportunity was there, and I should say, wouldn't have thought about Clarence Lewis for the background or backstory from the recruiting ranking, one of the lower ranked signees in the class, to the one non-early entrant, like you said, Lou. But I think there was definitely opportunity, only because last year's defensive backfield, and particularly corners for Notre Dame, assignment sound, didn't give up loads of big plays, fueled top 15, in some cases even top 5 rankings in pass efficiency defense, completion percentage, yards per attempt, I believe. But they didn't really get a lot of big plays, get their hands on the ball, interceptions. Notre Dame had 9 interceptions last year, and 4 of them were from Kyle Hamilton. And in 2017 and 18, the top 2 corners for Notre Dame had an average of 30.5 pass breakups or interceptions. Last year, they combined for, we're counting Bracey here just as the second highest total, 13. So not a lot of playmaking going on. And I think that anyone who would have demonstrated some playmaking ability was going to have a real chance to get in there just because you kind of need it, right? And Brace, it's kind of interesting that Bracey was the one who is, could see this at his expense in, some case just being listed as the co-starter because he had those team high 7, even though he is yet to record an interception in his first 3 years at Notre Dame. But I think that kind of need for just big plays back there is why there would have been an opportunity, even if you had just assumed in July that it's McLeod and Bracey are locked in as your starters, for someone to at least kind of siphon snaps and win a nickel job that is used for 40 snaps a game or something, just because they can get their hands on the ball or they can play the run. And it's just kind of hard to cover for 70 plays a game where you can be assignment sound and just like stay on guys if you're not getting a few times a game where you're getting your hand on the ball and taking it away or breaking up passes. So I'm curious to see Clarence Lewis in his debut on Saturday, however many snaps that ends up being, if he brings a degree of playmaking really against the pass or the run.
You knew somebody at that corner position among the younger players was going to have to emerge because you have 9 scholarship players there, but 6 of them have 4 years of eligibility. We mentioned 3 of the freshmen there, including Clarence Lewis, but you also had KJ Wallace, who has now moved to safety position. Isaiah Rutherford, who Clark Lee talked about, really made some notable off-season strides. And then an intriguing long prospect in Cam Hart, 6'3", he's got that Dante Vaughn type of length. Actually came in as a wide receiver last year. They moved him, I think, late September or so over to cornerback position because they were in need of body there. And right now he's listed as the top backup for Nick McLeod at the boundary position. So you figured okay, out of those six, somebody's got to emerge. One, maybe two this year. But, I probably would have had Clarence Lewis last going into the training camp, just based on the fact that he wasn't here as an early entrant like the other guys, and then guys like Wallace and Rutherford and Hart have been in the system for at least a year. And that's not even including Sean Crawford, who we'll get to hear pretty shortly here, because he had played mainly nickel and corner the past few years, and he started 8 games last season too in that capacity. So it's like, okay, he was kind of the so-called, no pun intended, safety valve at corner. And now he's actually become the safety valve at safety.
So let's talk about Crawford. I'm glad you mentioned him, and that he's the other starter at safety, not Houston Griffith, the highest rated signee in 2018 class, who was taking the first team reps in that one spring practice back in 1900. Not Isaiah Pryor, the grad transfer from Ohio State, who has 2 years of eligibility left, former top 150 recruit. But it's Crawford, who, like you said, Lou, has been a corner for most of his entire career. That has lasted longer than I've been alive, it feels. But he's the guy at strong safety. Brian Kelly told us, I believe, late August or early September, somewhere in there, that Crawford had moved to safety. And it's really the natural move in that you still cover slot receivers, because that's a lot of what he did. And he's a playmaking guy, and they could use a playmaker back there. And especially when you look at what similar in stature and same position Alohi Gilman was. He can show a blitz and drop back. He could play the run. He had enough range to drop back into coverage without getting burned. He could tackle. Crawford in this role can still cover slots. He can still be that nickel defender, which was probably going to be his role anyway if he stayed at corner. But I think this is a really good use of his instincts. I think it helps him kind of save a little bit of the body blows you might take at corner every snap, or press guys or big slot receivers that you see these teams putting in the slot, or tight ends. And it doesn't require quite the anything that you might say lose after playing it for 6 years or with 3 injuries behind you. I think safety is a little more forgiving on that. So I think this makes a lot of sense.
It's not foreign either, because last fall camp too in Culver, when they were up there, Sean was working at safety some there too. And originally Brian Kelly was talking about him as a placeholder at the position. And that's what we're talking about, seizing the moment, seizing the opportunity. The more he played, the more the coaching staff were saying, you know what, we're a better team with Sean Crawford at the safety position. And that's not completely a surprise, because his versatility and his football IQ has always been prominent. It's just been really a matter of, can he stay healthy? Can he last through the season? He's missed 3 full seasons basically, and then last year you thought he was going to miss another one when he had that gruesome elbow injury in I believe it was the Virginia game, and missed I think 2-3 weeks. So it's there's a reason why he's a captain, and it's not just because of his flexibility, his playmaking skills, but also the perseverance, the fortitude he's demonstrated constantly that makes everyone look up to him as a leader.
And you touched on it. I'll have a story up on this tomorrow morning on blueandgold.com, or if you're listening on Friday, it's already up there. Really, what he's done his entire career is just win jobs, right? He's showed up and seized roles from older guys, or seized roles that were unexpected of him. And here's the latest example.
Yeah, his freshman year, he came in, and by the second week, the coaching staff said, he's our starting nickel. And that's right before he tore his ACL first time, and he could not. So he just has that proclivity to shine wherever you put him or what role you give him.
And the on-field part speaks for itself too. And here's, I think, an interesting number that will help him, I think, at safety. And it just kind of illustrates that the transition is easy. Pro Football Focus credited him with 10 stops, which it calls plays that are a failure for the offense. And that can be individual pass breakups or tackles on a third down that are shorter the line to gain, or a tackle for loss or anything. That was the best among Notre Dame's corners last year. And the only other year or full year that he was healthy was 2017. He had the second most stops among all the defensive backs. He was fifth in snaps played among defensive backs that year. So, again, you talk about wanting a playmaker next to Hamilton and someone who's versatile and just has the instincts and the understanding of it. I think you found it. I think it's pretty clear.
Every time I've seen him in practice, he's always a standout. He's where the ball needs to be. You take that 2016 season where he played really only one full game. That was the opener at Texas. Well, he intercepts a pass in that game, and then he also returns a block kick for a 2-point conversion. He just has that propensity to be around the football. And that's Kyle Hamilton has that innate type of ability. Sean is a much smaller version of it, but he's another guy that you have running backs who smell the end zone. They just have that certain nose for it, know where they're at all the time. And Sean has that type of capability as a safety. And that's why the staff feels we are a better football team with Sean Crawford at that position. And I think one other thing to just look at, who's to say they're not going to play regularly more 3 safety type of looks, which is what Clark Lee did last year, especially against USC and their prolific passing attack. I mean, Kyle Hamilton, Jalen Elliott, Alohi Gilman were out there, pretty much the entire game. And with Kyle, it was more in that center field role. But we talk about the inexperience at corner and a lot of people needing to prove themselves. Well, maybe that's why you have that 3 safety look to compensate for it.
And that 3 safety look, Crawford's place in that isn't the third safety. He's a second safety that, all right, you bring in, at least for now, Pryor as a center fielder, Griffith as a box guy, and Crawford, of course, being able to go down in that slot position that he played before. But yeah, it wouldn't be a situation where maybe even when we thought, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, whenever Kelly told us that Crawford was playing safety, okay, maybe he's the third guy in that 3 safety defense that covers slot receivers, and it's basically the same role he played. No, he'll be in there in the base, and you're bringing in someone else to be the third safety there, and not necessarily Crawford. All right, let's move on. We've got a game in less than 2 days. We'll talk about Duke, give you some numbers here, but first, a word from our sponsor, Augie's. Looking for that unique Notre Dame item for the Irish fan in your life? Visit Augie's Locker Room, the country's #1 Notre Dame memorabilia shop. They have the largest selection of Notre Dame helmets, dating all the way back to the turn of the century up to the present day, including the Shamrock Series helmet. They also have stadium benches, frame tickets, one-of-a-kind Rockne items, signed items, many other unique pieces. If it is ND, they have what you are looking for. Visit them online at augieslockerroom.com or call 574-277-NDND. That's augieslockerroom.com. So Saturday's opponent, Duke, 5-7 last year, and really any way you shake it was just not good on offense. They were 125th in the country out of 130 in yards per play, 124th in plays of 30-plus yards, worst rushing offense in the ACC by yards per carry. I know, of course, that is fueled by sacks counting against your rushing yardage, which for some reason is still a stat. But even if you took out the sacks, their rushing numbers are pretty ghastly. Top 2 receivers had fewer than 10 yards per catch. So you don't see a lot of explosion. You don't see a lot of dudes out there. And you really can't get any worse, which is kind of why you think, all right, it can't be that bad when they roll into Notre Dame Stadium on Saturday. New quarterback, Chase Bryce, the Clemson transfer. I think he should be better than what they had, which was just kind of rotation of ineffective guys. Even if he's not an all ACC guy, the pedigree with his Clemson background, former 4-star recruit, obviously would have been well coached there. Helped rescue them in 2018 from a come-from-behind win at home against Syracuse. David Cutcliffe, the 13th-year head coach, taking over play-calling duties. So, Lou, I can't imagine it can get any worse than the messy offense we already saw in Durham a year ago.
Yeah, it just struck me while watching that game is just the lack of explosiveness and speed overall. And that surprised me a little bit because one of their running backs, Dion Jackson from Atlanta Pace Academy, and Notre Dame's recruiting a top receiver there currently for the 2021 class as well. But he was at the Irish invasion. Notre Dame was after him pretty strongly. And a couple years ago in 2018, he was second team All ACC. He averaged 5.3 yards a carry, ran for about 850 yards. Last year, it really dropped significantly to 3.7 yards per carry. It's an excellent grade point average, but you don't want to see that necessarily from the lead back. But a lot of capability there. Now, they had 4 starters returning along the offensive line, but last Wednesday, tough development there. Their starting center, who was an all ACC honorable mention pick, Jack Wallaba, tore his ACL. So now you're dealing with a new center, a snap exchange, a new quarterback into the system who was just kind of named there last week. So that's going to be an interesting aspect to their offense there, just finding that continuity, being able to maybe establish something in the middle without their star center, see if they can get any kind of running game going to complement Chase Bryce as a passer, because David Cutcliffe will be able to formulate something. We saw this even last year, Louisville, in that opener. They came out with a few wrinkles and surprises that caught Notre Dame off guard. There are people predicting Notre Dame on the message board after the first 2 Louisville drives that they'll be lucky if they're 7-5, et cetera, which is when we know the season actually begins. But when you have somebody like a David Cutcliffe now calling the plays, and I think there's going to be some wrinkles in there that could catch Notre Dame off guard.
Yeah, you mentioned it, T-minus 45 hours until the first board meltdown and scorching hot takes that show up on, and then you really know it's game day. And with Jackson, they just couldn't block for him, and it was a season-long, mess. And the lack of explosiveness, here's exactly what illustrates it. Jalen Calhoun, leading receiver last year, 62 targets, 27 behind the line of scrimmage, 18 more within 5 yards of the line. Tight end Noah Gray, only 16 of his 69 targets on passes more than 10 yards downfield. So they didn't even try to throw it vertically at all. And that's what their hope should be, that Chase Bryce can give them a little bit more help there. And of course, we just spent a lot of time talking about why Notre Dame's secondary is intriguing. But when you look at it, I'm sure from an opposing standpoint, you think it's something that you can at least try to test. And we heard Cutcliffe say it earlier this week that they want to be aggressive. And at least you have the most important part, personnel-wise, of being aggressive, and that's a quarterback who actually has the ability to do it. So definitely interesting to see just how much better or much of a offensive ability Duke has compared to the non-existent levels of it a year ago. I think what we're all really be paying attention to, as you alluded to, earlier on, was their defense. Of course, Chris Rumpf, defensive end, Victor Dimukeji, defensive end. They even have a third guy back there, Drew Jordan, former 4-star recruit, who rotates in there with them as well. And just even watching, Chris Rumpf, if you just put on highlights of him or anything, I don't think it's going to be just the tackles that have to worry about him. He's kind of a stand-up guy. They'll put him all over the place, can use him as a what if there was a defensive end equivalent of a rover, like the rover linebacker in Notre Dame system? He's what that role would look like. You'll see him bring pressure from any kind of different spots along the line, put his hand in the ground, stand up, and even just kind of looking at his best plays from Notre Dame last year, he did more work on the guards than he did on those tackles, which you would expect considering the Notre Dame tackle skill level. But one that if it's just, say, Robert Hainsey holding him to no pressures for that game, where you could still have that be true, and he wreaks havoc coming from other spots where Hainsey's just not going to be assigned to him.
Well, there was aggressiveness last year too, and that's what helped enable Ian Book to have the type of game that he did, which was 139 yards rushing. I believe that's the third highest in Notre Dame history by a quarterback. But at the same time, he threw 4 touchdown passes and 180 yards. So he was really able to keep that defense off balance because Duke's going to play a lot of press. And I think especially against a Notre Dame core where they haven't demonstrated yet that is there a go-to figure, somebody that they can rely on, honestly. And if they can maybe put Ian Book a little bit out of rhythm and maybe not get the ball out of his hands as quickly as he would like with the press coverage, maybe then they can do some damage in that area.
All right, let's give the people what they want here. Some predictions. We'll go through a few over-unders here, and Lou, I'll give them to you, and you tell me if you're taking the over or under for this in this game in particular. Chris Tyree, talked a lot about him earlier on, written extensively about him. He will play over-under 9.5 offensive touches. What are you
That's
going
good
with?
that you said offensive touches because he's also the starting kickoff return man, which leads me to believe he'll touch it at least 6-7 times. I think, I'm looking for 5-6 carries, maybe a couple of passes out there. I'll say just barely under. He'll get 8.
Give me that over. I think it'll be hard to take off the field with that explosiveness. I'll take 10. Why not? Over under. Duke has 200 passing yards in this game.
Even with as bad as their passing attack was last year, they averaged 179 yards. So I think with the Chase Bryce and with David Cutcliffe at the controls calling it, and with, a secondary that's still in somewhat flux with the loss of 3 starters from last year, I think they will surpass that.
I'm right there with you. I'm taking the over. Tommy Tremble plays over or under 50 snaps. Not listed as the starting tight end. That's Brock Wright. But as you alluded to at the top of the show here, Lou, especially with tight ends and the way Brian Kelly says we're going to see so many multiple sets of them, we're going to see Tommy Tremble. I think it's right now he's their best receiving tight end, and that's especially over Wright. So does he play 50 snaps?
I don't know if he plays 50 snaps, but I will bet you that he will play the most snaps among the tight ends, even though he's not listed as the starter. Cole Kmet played, I thought, almost too much, 60 or so. I'll say, 50 snaps. He'll be over.
Give me that over, too, especially because if there's anyone Book has rapport with going back to last year, it's Tommy Tremble. And I think we've, even in that little snippet of 16 catches, saw the mismatch capability and receiving potential that he has. And I'll go with this. He plays 50 snaps or over 50 snaps, and he outsnaps both of the slot receivers. Because if you're playing 2 tight end sets, where's that second tight end come from, right? It's probably going to be that slot receiver, especially because Tremble's going to line up there. And especially when you look at, between Avery Davis and Lawrence Keys and Tremble, just on an explosiveness factor, and Book being familiar with them both, I'm going to say he plays over 50 snaps. Let's take that same number over or under 50 snaps for Braden Lindsey.
Definitely under. I can't see Braden playing more than 50 because of, first of all, we talked about the multiple tight end formations. Then you have the rotations at receiver with Skoranek, McKinley, Lindsey. Look, you might split out a Chris Tyree or Kyron Williams there too. There's only so many guys you can put on the field. And I think he'll be around 30, 35, maybe even 40, but 50 is a lot.
I'm going easily under on this one too. And I think that it can be something that ramps up over the course of the year. For all we know, there's situations here.
Yeah, there's situations. That's exactly it.
And or especially situations in training camp. Like I said, with these depth charts, never quite know what's up. And I can't imagine a situation where he is not part of their plans. But I'll go with what Kelly put out on that depth chart and say that no, even though he can rotate in and receivers rotate, he won't play a starter's workload. Who scores Notre Dame's first touchdown of the year? All right, what's the situation? Passing, receiving, who catches it? Who runs for it? What does it look like? What do you think?
How many people remember who scored the first touchdown last year?
I don't.
Jameer Smith. And who would have thought? Because, at the end of the year, so I'm almost wanting to see in a goal line situation Osita Ekwonu.
Yes.
Well, by the way, he's working more so at linebacker. He's just going to be in for some special packages. But I'm going to say I'll go with an over-the-top pop pass type to Tommy Tremble for the first touchdown.
You stole my idea. Book to Brock Wright, goal line touchdown. Who's the leading receiver in this game? Most catches or most yards? However one you want to define it.
We talked about Braden Lindsey not getting the 50 snaps, but he may have the most receiving yards because all it's going to take is one big play, especially against press coverage, if he can get off it and go deep on it. He can score on one of those 50, 60-yard plays. I don't know if anybody gets 100 yards. I could see a Ben Skoranek maybe catching 5 for 65, 70 yards, but maybe a 60-yard pass to Lindsey and another 10 or 12-yard gain. You'll get close to 80, so I'll say that.
I'm going to go with Skoranek as well. I think he catches at least 6 passes. We talked about, or we heard from Book and the coaches who've had all the best possible things you can say about Skoranek with his work habits, and now, of course, the opportunities there with Kevin Austin out for a little while. He flew out to California before everybody reported back to work with Book. So if we're thinking about rapport or how are a grad transfer receiver and a quarterback going to mesh with no spring practice, I think that'll be lessened with just the fast chemistry they've all seemed to build. All right, let's get to the good stuff here. Predictions. Score, Notre Dame is a 20-point favorite. Lou, score prediction, do they cover? Which, of course, you don't answer. But
I think in the edition, I had it 31-14 Notre Dame because I'm just not certain how offenses come out here in this game. There's going to be a lot put on the offensive line for Notre Dame, understandably, with the experience that they have. I think Duke's defense is capable. I thought they played very well in the opener for at least a half against Alabama last year. The defense kind of held its own. And I think they can do that here as well. And I'm expecting a much better Duke team. They embarrassed themselves at the end of last year. They finished, I believe, 1-4, 1-5. They lost 49-6 to Syracuse, in addition to the 38-7 loss to Notre Dame. And I think they will make a much better accounting of themselves, just like in 2016. Even though they won at Notre Dame Stadium, they finished 4-8 that year. But the next 2 years, they went to bowl games. They bounced back well. And I really have great, great respect and admiration for what David Cutcliffe has there. And I think they will play with a lot of pride to just keep it maybe close enough to be under the spread. So I can see 34-17, similar to the 35-17 win at Louisville last year.
I had it at 41-13 Notre Dame in our preseason magazine. I'm just going to say right now that was a little overzealous. I'm going to go 34-13 Notre Dame wins. Notre Dame covers. But, yes, I don't see for them putting up, say, 41 points with, first game of the year in the offense and a defense that's good, like we discussed. The only way I really see even Duke having a chance to win this or winning this is it has to shut down Notre Dame's offense. I don't see any way that Duke is going to be able to score enough on Notre Dame's defense to make this a shootout style win. So if Duke wins it, I think this is some kind of 24-20 or 20-17 side slot fest where Notre Dame's just asleep on offense and Duke makes enough big plays. And
one thing I would say, Brian Kelly's offenses and openers have really been outstanding, especially on opening drives. I believe on 7 of the last 8 years, they scored 2 touchdowns in the first quarter in the opening game. And I think almost in every game, they scored on their opening possession, touchdown, boom, right down the field. And another part of it is that the last 8 years, they've had only 3 turnovers in the opening game. You usually expect, like in that opener, to be a little sloppy, a little ragged and all, but they've done a really good job coming out in that first game and playing really well. Ever since that South Florida game in 2011, where they had 5 turnovers, and it was just – even there, they drove right down the field, 76 yards down to the 5 or 4 yard line, but then fumbled and it was returned the other way. So that's the main thing that is always the X factor in any games is turnovers. Last year, Duke was in the bottom 3% at committing turnovers. They had 28. Notre Dame was in the top 3% at forcing turnovers with 28 and recovered the most fumbles in the country with 19. So that usually will be the point spread difference most of the time. Is what we don't know is how the turnovers will shake out. But first games under Brian Kelly, offensively, they've really, really been pretty sharp. You saw that even against Michigan 2 years ago, against the vaunted Michigan defense. Boom, boom, touchdowns on the first 2 series. Chris Fink makes a great catch. Jafar Armstrong runs in for a touchdown. Go 90 yards on another one. It's 21-3 before you know it, and then they kind of lock it down and let the defense win it.
All the more reason why I don't think they're going to be caught sleeping here. You ready? Ready to watch some football?
Yeah. Listen, after when the Big Ten shut down last month, I just thought that was going to be a domino effect, and the rest of college football will follow the lead. And, it's almost surreal now. When we were putting together the preseason edition and the yearbook during the summer, and I was almost joking, this is going to be a collector's item for the season that isn't and all. And it's until you actually get there, you're still keeping your fingers crossed. But great job by the Notre Dame staff and the overall operation to get to this point.
Oh, it will fully hit when I walk into the Notre Dame Stadium press box on Saturday. Let's go do it. Let's watch. And we will talk again on Monday. That's when we'll have our post-game podcasts up for you with the two of us kind of breaking down what we saw every Monday. Please, again, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. Subscribe to blueandgold.com. We'll love you forever. Use the promo code IRISH60. That's IRISH60. We will talk to you again next week. Happy opening weekend for all of you Notre Dame fans. Till then, take care.